have said, are Black feminists and matriarchs who've always instilled in me such a pride of my Africanness, my history, my culture. I think being from Sierra Leone, specifically Creole heritage, my people beyond my great-great-great-grandparents are also who were taken from West Africa. They could have been in Jamaica, Nova Scotia, the Americas. And before that, again, it could be Congo, Ghana, Nigeria. And I say that because my people are Pan-African in politics, but also Pan-African in genetics. And I feel that in my interests, the cultures that I'm attuned to, the vibes that I'm in, the things that I read. So yeah, those are my people. And Hakeem, I knew you were going to do that. Guys, stay patient with us. We're just going to be having a nice conversation with each other. Hope that's fine with you. Pulling it over to decolonizing wealth though. So decolonization is fast becoming the sector's buzzword, and it's battered about left, right, and center. And I'm not really sure philanthropy has really grappled with what this actually means and what it requires of us all. A Decolonizing Wealth project, shock horror, we talk about decolonizing wealth quite a lot. And for us, it isn't a one day or a surface level exercise, but really big systemic work. And it speaks to the undoing of colonial white supremacist cultures and structures, which have enabled countries like the USA, the UK, to amass and accumulate wealth and resources historically and currently through extraction, theft, harm, both to bodies, but also the environment. And I say this because philanthropy is entwined in this. One, because colonization has shaped every part of our lives. But two, many funds and foundations have built their wealth on the back of this exploitation. And this is enabled by the extractive and unjust financial systems that we exist in. So decolonizing wealth is a really multi-layered work. It's really multi-layered work, but a very practical thing that folks and foundations can do, which I think all of us on this call are committed to, is moving money to communities who have been historically excluded, extracted from, and hurt the most, and doing it from a place of repair, not charity. And like I mentioned, I know this framing is something that you can both resonate with. So over to you, Luam, what does decolonizing wealth mean to you? Or maybe over to you, Hakima, because Luam looks frozen.
I think Luam is frozen. So I'll go ahead and jump in. And sorry about also my connection in case it fails. It's raining over here, and somehow rain and power, electricity go hand in hand with not working. But I hope it all stays connected. So yeah, it absolutely resonates with me, Vanessa, what you were saying about decolonizing wealth and what that looks like. And the Black Feminist Fund, we know that wealth, as you said, is accumulated from the exploitation of Black and other people's labor and bodies and lands. And Black feminists are at, I know we always say forefront, but are fighting back and fighting that exploitation. And the question is, are there ways to disrupt any of the sites of accumulation, and in this case, philanthropy, and then expropriate those financial resources and channel them towards Black feminists who are dismantling those very systems of accumulation? And I think to some extent, we can do that, and that's our attempt at the Black Feminist Fund. And of course, it's only one tactic in a broad ecosystem of tactics. It's not the bravest or the boldest tactic, but it's a contribution. And I think one of the things that you said, Vanessa, that resonates with me is that decolonizing has already become one of the buzzwords in philanthropy or elsewhere. And we see that, right, with language, with ideas, with that they become in some ways co-opted, in some ways commodified, in some ways, while the essence of them is undervalued, and that it doesn't make the shift and the transformation that the very nature of this, the ideas necessitate. So what I think is really important also when we talk about decolonizing wealth is to make sure that we're consistent about the actions that is required for that, and the actions are transformative. They're not chipping at just the edges. It looks like Luam's unfrozen.
It does look like Luam's unfrozen. Luam, just before you froze at the perfect spot, I was kicking it over to you to talk us through what decolonizing wealth means to you.
Thank you. And sorry about that. I'm in the midst of a rainstorm and a power cut. So my data is cooperating when it wants to, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. So if I cut, I'll keep trying to rejoin. What does decolonizing wealth mean for me? I think the shortest answer is I don't think you can decolonize wealth unless you get rid of accumulation, which I think, and I missed part of what Hakima was saying, but I think it's part of what she was probably talking about in her response. But that's part of the reason then when we're looking at philanthropy and we're analyzing what philanthropy is and the contribution that it can make, there needs to be an understanding that as people who are interested in supporting the systems change work of the people we're funding, one of the commitments that we have to make then is to ensure that accumulation of wealth doesn't continue, let alone in centers of the global north that have been historic sites of oppression, of enslavement, of exploitation of people's labors, of land, and of resources. And so if we're talking about decolonization, that process happens as a parallel to the conversations in philanthropy, in that philanthropy can help to fund and create more enabling conditions for systems change, but that a necessity of decolonization is for institutions within philanthropy itself, to be to end, for it to not continue. And so in that way, I think what oftentimes happens is, as we're in these kinds of conversations within the philanthropic sector, people talk about decolonization because it's a buzzword. It's cool, it's important, people want to be associated with the thing that isn't oppressive. And we also have to know our role, understand the fight that we have, and understand the fight that movements who are fighting for systems change, that are on the front lines, who are in and of the communities that are seeking liberation, our struggle is not the same. And if we keep conflating that within the philanthropic conversations, we're going to keep delaying processes of decolonization. And so for that reason, I think we have to be careful. And I was at a meeting with UAF, Urgent Action Fund and Trust Africa, a month and a half ago. And in one of those conversations, one of the things that really dawned on me is that within philanthropy, we sometimes confuse tactics for surviving neoliberalism with decolonization. And we have to really make sure to keep those separate and have to have clear political analysis. And that part of what we fund is for people to be able to resist and survive neoliberal markets and the ways that neoliberalism structures economic lives, but that isn't just the only access or the only site of struggle, that there's also a lot of other terrains.
Oh, I didn't realize until being host today that you can't actually do reactions on Zoom. I was thinking, where's the fire? Where's the fire? Everything you both said. Yeah. Hakima, coming back to you though, you mentioned Black Feminist Fund, and one of the co-founders. Could you just share a little bit more about the genesis of this fund, why it's so necessary, the wins, of which there are many we know, and where to next?
Sure, I will. So the Black Feminist Fund started as a collective vision about 10 years ago. And we bring it back to that collective vision because we like to show that, a lot of the work that gets done, the disruptive work, the intentional work, is not something that appears in its immediacy. So we did about 10 years of collective visioning by and with Black feminists who were in movements and Black women who were in philanthropy. And it started, like many good ideas, at a kitchen table between friends and we were venting. We were enraged by the fact that Black women and gender expansive folk, that we just don't have access to the funding that we deserve to do the Black feminist work that is transformative and that's going to be absolutely necessary if we're going to save this planet, if we need to end militarism and all of and impoverishment and capitalism and all of these things. So it started from that moment of frustration, of rage, and turns into really generative conversation about what we can do about it. And the idea was that together as Black women, we could leverage our access to resources and the sites of power and make a change, make an intervention that would not only kind of model for philanthropy what funding Black feminist movements like we genuinely want them to win would look like, but also that we could influence philanthropy and kind of push the button on why the underfunding has been so persistent, and really expose the gendered and racialized biases of philanthropy. So we just launched Where's the Money for Black Feminist Movements research. You all can find it at fundblackfeminist.org. Please have a look. It kind of, obviously, as I said, we were funded and founded, we sat at the table and we were enraged by our experiences and the experiences in our communities. And we knew this to be true. We didn't, the dire under-resourcing and the kind of undervaluing of Black feminist work. We knew it to be true. We didn't necessarily have the figures and the data. And so this research provides some of that data. For example, it shows that 0.1 to 0.35% of overall global foundation funding goes to serve Black women, girls, and trans folk, and that's global, so including the whole continent of Africa. We've also shown that the majority of Black feminist groups do not have access to core funding and don't have access to funding for the following fiscal year. So it leaves Black feminist organizers in this cycle of precarity, despite the work that they do that really is, again, transformative and system changing, and really needs to be supported in the ways that they deserve.
Thank you, Hakima, and echoing John's kind of comment in the chat of thank you guys for doing this work. Just zooming in on the precarity that you mentioned, I think this is something that we see kind of time and time again with Black movements, specifically Black feminist movements. So a superpower that we have is to kind of shine despite all of these hurdles. We're literally glowing whilst navigating and working within thunderstorms, power cuts, white supremacy, you name it, we're smashing it. What have been the most challenging aspects of this work for you all, and where have you found solace and community to keep showing up? And I'll kick it over to Luam, and then Hakima, you can jump in.
Thanks, Vanessa. What have I found the most challenging? I mean, I think the first thing is that within philanthropy, though there's pockets like the Black Feminist Fund, Thousand Currents, and others, Decolonizing Wealth, who are really pushing for the sector to understand that lived experience is the best set of expertise you can possibly have about your own condition. And I think philanthropy, one of the things that I still find really challenging about it is that philanthropy still has a learning agenda that doesn't center people who are struggling on the front lines, doesn't center movements and their experiences and their visions, that it's still largely led by a set of metrics that are decided in philanthropic headquarters and then have to be adapted by program officers into what the world should look like. And I think for me, that's the most challenging, because in the work that we do, funding food sovereignty, climate justice, and economic justice across the global South, is that movement visions are some of the most beautiful, bold, and transformative visions. And they're not only beautiful and transformative, they're also proven and they're holistic. They're not siloed, they work across movements. And the idea is to build ways of being and ways of relating that are sustainable, that are relevant, and that are dynamic. And so for me, the frustration that can sometimes sit in philanthropy is that we're missing so much beauty and transformation in this moment, especially in the midst of a climate crisis, in the midst of multiple crises, including an economic crisis. It's that we have experiments, we have ways of being that are different than the status quo, but we're not resourcing them in the ways that they need to be to really be able to grow and proliferate, for those experiments to be able to take root in different ways. And this isn't to say, to be clear, that for experiments that movements are moving forward, that they need philanthropic resources. Movements absolutely are created and grown without needing money, but it's a resource that can help to move work forward in different ways. And so for me, I think that it would probably be the most challenging piece. The other and the most kind of recent in the last 2 to 3 years is that in a lot of ways within philanthropy, there's ways that we've won some of the communication war. You know, lots of people talk about trust-based philanthropy. Lots of people talk about the need to really listen to movements, but we're not seeing that translate into strategic plans of philanthropic organizations. And so that can sometimes feel frustrating to be hearing the rhetoric, but not seeing it in practice. And so really, for me, I think as someone who's working in philanthropy, I understand my role to be really to move us from the rhetoric into the practice. And that for me is, I think, the balm to some of those frustrations. And to be able to work with other Black women and Black feminists in philanthropy, but also to be able to receive the support of movements whose really sharp and clear political analysis are really what is helping philanthropy move in a different direction.
Echoing all of that, and before I pass it over to you, Hakima, something that I've kind of spotted is like, it's brilliant being in the Decolonizing Wealth, the Thousand Currents and Black Feminist Fund bubbles. But when you step out of that, philanthropy still seems to see racial justice and gender justice as a topic or a theme, like trying to see the kind of intersects of how it should run throughout all of your work is still something that I think we're pushing for. And as you said, the rhetoric and the communications is there, but actually seeing it in the different ways of working, the different programming. Yeah. Hakima, over to you.
Yeah, I would just like to add, one of those narratives that we see a lot is this question of scale. And it's so ironic because philanthropy want movements to work at scale, but continue to fund Black feminists with crumbs. Philanthropy itself needs to fund at scale. We talk at the Black feminist funds about grant sizes that are impactful. If Black feminist groups are small, it's because of that cycle of precarity that I was talking about that's just reinforced consistently by this idea about absorptive capacity and all of these things. Since we know that Black feminist groups are mighty and they deserve then the resources that allow them to meet those goals, and that so those resources need to be as mighty as the groups themselves. One of the things that also that was triggered by what Luan was saying about philanthropy and accumulation and all of those things, there's a strange way in which philanthropy runs towards new issues or situations. Things are very fickle in different ways, but yet the understanding of the urgency of large-scale funding and consistent funding doesn't seem to be there. There's still a way that philanthropy is used as a hoarding site in the name of investments for the continued accumulation of really challenge the ways in which like I said, how philanthropy tends to be fickle. As you said, Vanessa, Black feminist work is intersectional. And so if they're also really narrow in terms of how they understand themes or issues, etc., then there'll be an immediate barrier to how Black feminist groups are able to be funded. And then I think just speaking to the second part of your question around what kind of gives us solace or allows us to show up, agree with what Luan was saying. It's really the movements. As I said, I feel like I'm powered by the people. So as long as there's that resistance, so long as there's those freedom dreams that are being turned into realities, no matter where they are on this planet and for how long and for how many people, even if it's just one person saying, I have a vision of a more just world, that gives me hope and fuel and makes me ready. What about you, Vanessa? What gives you fuel?
Oh, Hakima, I knew you were going to do this, and yeah, I hadn't thought about this. So many things give me fuel. Echoing everything you said, throughout my career, I've had to, well, I say I've had to, it's been accidental, but I found so much solace in and community in Black women. And similar to kind of the genesis of Black Feminist Fund, this started with a kind of rant with a few other Black women who worked in international development. And then seeing that, oh, if it's something that all five of us are experiencing, maybe this is a thing. To, again, in workplaces, just seeking out Black people in global majority communities, but also white allies were open to listen and to be challenged, who were like, hold on, this thing of philanthropy is very, very racist and colonial. Why is that? So that has definitely pushed me forward. I'm also, and my team know this, a very big proponent of finding joy and finding rest and like equilibrium where I can. And that doesn't necessarily mean just having a nap, the way I wish it did, but just listening to music. My mood can just be switched like that, from listening to beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sounds to being in nature. I think irrespective of your kind of sector, there's so many things you have to do to navigate the challenging world that we live in. And I am fortunate that I have fantastic Black women at home and globally who I can really lean on. But I knew you were going to do that, Hakeem. I should have been better prepared. But zooming in on something you said, Luam, in fact, you both talked about this. You've both spoken about the importance of movement and movement building. So Luam, kind of focusing on you, can you share a little bit more about your work within African movement building and the importance of centering Indigenous frameworks and governance? So slightly move left.
Yeah, as you both were talking, something that came up for me that I was like, is also important is this idea of experimentation. And it's in experimentation that we learn, that we reflect, that we innovate. And going kind of back a little bit to what we were talking about just before, I think that's another thing that I feel is really important for philanthropy to really lean into, is a spirit of experimentation. And that really starts from our willingness to understand learning in different ways. So now tying that to the question that you asked me around the Indigenous governance and frameworks and Indigenous self-determination, for me, that's the kind of center of what I imagine a different and a new world can be. The way I imagine a new world isn't that, you know, it looks like this and the streets look like this and painting a picture in that way. For me, the picture that gets painted is that people can self-determine their realities without coercion, without power being centralized through military coercion, you know, but being able to really, in community and in dialogue, be able to build what it is that they want to build that makes sense in that moment. And I think there's so many ways that Indigenous peoples across the globe really have shown us how to be able to do that. And so for that reason, my research, my curatorial practices, and even what drives the kind of work I do within my wage work within as the director of global programs at Thousand Currents is the experimentation, the bold vision of Indigenous governance frameworks that are not static, that they are only working insofar as they serve the needs of the people. And when they stop serving the needs of the people, they shift. And I think there's so many ways that philanthropy can learn from those models in terms of our strategy should be living documents. They should only exist so long as they serve the needs of the movements that we're funding and supporting. When they stop doing that, if we ossify them and insist, and then further yet, create learning agendas that are based on really like narrow metrics, what we end up doing is stifling experimentation. And in stifling experimentation, we're stifling the possibility of new worlds becoming. And so for me, it's why I always, whether it's in my personal practice or in my work, go back to, well, what are the different ways that Indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant peoples, Black peoples across the globe are showing us not only how they survive, but also how they thrive. And that for me, again, is the site of beauty, but it's also the site of inspiration as well. Again,
Missing out on the fire emoji. I'm just like, everything, such insight. We're coming back a bit to something that I touched on, thinking about rest and trying to find joy. And I always like to focus on this because as Black women, rest is a very political act, with the world constantly trying to extract from us and ask us of things and get, take. So to both of you, how do you prioritize you, recharge, and find Black girl joy? And Hakima, I'll start with you.
I was like, oh no, don't start with me. I find joy in the everyday things, the little things, the flowers, the trees, but also in the victories. Often we're told that our victories are small, or somehow it feels like the powers against us are so big. But it's so important for us to be able to see all of the ways in which, as I said earlier, we're taking over, if it's narrative, if it's families and relationships, and the ways we do that, and how, you know, there are victories even at the state level or others, and there are victories in the streets, and there are victories on the farms, and those give me so much joy. I find joy in Black love, in music, as you said, Vanessa, in books. I love me a good book. Those kinds of things.
Before I pass it over to Luam, Hakima, I know you were holding yourself back on going into what you say is the like academic levels of rest and how it's a kind of privilege type thing. And I want you to take us there. I haven't let you off.
Vanessa, the things I tell you outside of public, you're bringing, okay, all right, I see you. Rest. It's really important. And yet I also feel like, as I said, I feel fueled by the energies of those who are resisting. I feel, you know, when I was growing up, my mom, as a kind of way to navigate white supremacy, she would say, play the game. Don't become like them, don't value the system, whatever, but play the game, you know? Which for me meant get what you need and use it for your people. Use your privilege and access, and I think for the benefit of your people. And that's what I take with me. And I know how much my people experience of oppression in so many multifaceted ways. And I feel like there are so many people who deserve to be resting before I do, with all the privileges and access that I have. So, you know, that's my complicated relationship with rest.
Thanks, Hakima. And yes, I had to bring that into the public domain because it's such an important point, and one of the many kind of complexities that we hold. Luam, I'm going to pass it over to you. So rest, joy, where are you getting it from?
Where do I find joy? In many different places. I think, like I said when I first started, I find joy in the creativity of Black people to continue surviving, but also to continue dreaming of different worlds. The fact that given everything that has happened, that is happening, that we still find room for our freedom dreams is ultimately what really is the thread of joy that has consistently been throughout my life. And in terms of rest, I think it's +1 to what Hakima was saying. I think we can't talk about rest as an individual framework. We have to talk about it as interdependent beings. In Tigrinya, and the language that I speak, we have a saying that says, every stone that's thrown is also carried by you. And so there's a way that essentially what it's saying, now I'm bringing African proverbs, but you know, here we are. Essentially what it's saying is that you can't be and exist outside of the people and the environment around you. And so in order for me to rest, we have to create the conditions for our people to rest, for the planet to exist, for us to not continue trying to live beyond our planetary boundaries. And so for me, rest is a continual process that we're working towards. And I think if we continue to frame it as an individual ambition, I think we're losing the radical political analysis that the people before us tried to imbue, that they fought for, so that we can be in here and having those conversations. So in order to not betray the where we want to be, I think we have to hold it as a community. And so for me, rest has to be communal. Rest cannot be an extraction from the struggle. And I think there's ways for us to be able to care for each other and share the workload and share the difficulty and share the joy all together. And we can't just have privilege be the thing that carries that through.
Vanessa, next time, can you just ask the one first, and then I can just say what she said?
Right? We're all just typing it down like,
what? That's what I was trying to say, but she said it better.
No, you definitely said that. And Luam, retweeting everything, I think we need to get, I wrote it down, we need to get freedom dreams on a t-shirt or on a journal. Or, yeah, that needs to go somewhere.
Well, let me plug. Robin Kelly has a book called Freedom Dreams for people. Also, another thing that also gives me like immense joy are also books. So plus one Hekima. But yeah, it's a really interesting meditation on the Black radical tradition. It's called Freedom Dreams by Robin Kelly. Definitely recommend it if you all haven't read it. And then also as an aside, if you also just are interested in cultural production, he's also done a really interesting book on Thelonious Monk. Yeah, I'm out here plugging Robin Kelly. But anyway, really interesting historian. And I think if you're interested in this conversation, his work is also quite interesting.
Here for it. The gems that everyone's getting, not just your wisdom, but also book recommendations, wicked Black feminist, like, yeah, the gifts that keep on giving are both of you guys. And this is something that you both touched on. And despite you both looking 21, you have given decades to this work, specifically resourcing and supporting women and girls. So could you just let's talk about some milestones, some highlights. What have been the big wins in your work over the last few years? Hekima, you're shaking. Luam, you're shaking your head. So I'm going to go to Hekima first.
Okay, good. Great.
Didn't we just say we weren't doing that? Okay, apparently nobody listens to Hekima, but it's okay. I'm going to give it a go. It's what I was saying about victories and how we need to recognize them when they're happening, despite the fact that change isn't linear and that things will come back. So I'm going to bring in an example of something that right now we're experiencing as a pushback. As everyone will have seen, the Parliament of Uganda just recently, just yesterday, passed the bill that they call the anti-homosexuality bill, which further criminalizes LGBTIQ Africans in Uganda and is shit. So, but some of the victories that I think I've experienced is seeing the massive mobilization, movement building, community building of queer Africans during the last time they tried to pass a bill like this in Uganda back in 2006, 7, 8. It was such an important time of when folks came together from multiple identities, classes, genders, etc., and really fought back on multiple levels as well. So from different sites of struggle, it was a beautiful moment, not just with LGBTIQ identified folks, but also with allies, particularly in the feminist movement and those beyond, who really fought back. And it meant that there was a strong movement. And of course, there was also an interesting relationship at the time to money and philanthropy. In some ways, it looked like money was pouring into the region for queer organizing, when in actual fact, the money that was arriving was actually pittance, but it also caused in some ways chaos. But beyond that, there was cultural production. There's so many artists who came up in that movement. There was ways in which people used safe spaces and places of joy and Black love as expressions of resistance. There were places where people were taking governments to court and putting their visibility and themselves on the line and using lots of different tactics that were really put them at risk, people at the forefront. There were folks who were doing study groups in people's homes and living rooms. There were folks who were like on the streets protesting, rainbow flags out despite the potential of violence. And so I think when we see things that are happening like they happened yesterday in Uganda, we often feel somewhat despair that it keeps coming up, but that these things are happening, and don't necessarily focus on the times when the movement has flourished and the communities have thrived despite it. So that's why I wanted to bring that example.
Thank you, Hakima, and thank you for referencing the bill that passed yesterday in Uganda, sending love and strength and all of that kind of solidarity to keep moving despite this to gender expansive and queer folks in Uganda. Luam, I'm passing it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Hakima, and also sending solidarity to people in Kenya and people in Ghana as well, and others that are facing the backlash of the conservative and right agenda. I know you asked the question as like, what are the kind of victories or things that I hold myself? I find that hard to answer for a lot of different reasons, which, maybe we can get into over coffee one day. But for today, I'm also going to redirect the question a little bit. And I think for me, one of the victories that I keep seeing every day are the victories of smallholder farmers across the global South. If you walk in the world, you would think that food is produced by these big corporations that have, in a lot of different ways, tried to completely decimate the public sector across the global South. And the victory that I'm reminded of every day as I do the work, like I mentioned, my work focuses mostly on climate, the economy, and different food systems and food systems transformations, is that despite the continual onslaught of capitalism on peoples across the global South, including African peoples, 70% of the food in the world is still produced by smallholder farmers, by people in their communities tending to their land. That's the majority of the food that's produced, with hardly like a third of the resources that anybody else is able to really get in terms of industrialized agriculture. Those are things that I think we often don't see, the hidden everyday victories that people in their day-to-day lives continue to fight for, continue to achieve, that allow for all of us to continue doing the work that we're doing, to continue eating. Those are the kinds of things that the victories that really lift me, that continue to push me to do the work, that continue to push me to learn as well and live life differently. I think the other thing also is, for me, the victory of, like I said before, creativity and cultural production. I was reading earlier about this Black woman sculptor from the early 1900s, Augusta Savage, I think is her name. And one of the things that she did was use sculpture as a way to engage her people of the different political contexts that she was in, the ways that Black people were oppressed, but the way that people were fighting back. And as she got bigger, the thing that struck me about her is that as she got more famous, even with all of the kind of racism that was launched against her, what she did was go back to her community and create an institution where other Black artists could develop, where other Black artists could have their work shown. And so for me, it's also in those moments where, when we have a victory, we don't keep the victory to ourselves, but we figure out how to use that victory to sustain our communities and to fuel the victories of other people that are also struggling and fighting for their liberation, and in turn then for our liberation as well.
So book recommendations, art and sculpture. Guys, we really should have charged for this. The gems that everyone's getting from Hakima and Luam, I'm like, we missed the trick next time. But honing in on what you both said, as much as social media is something that I'm always having angst and my kind of internal gripes with, I think that has been such an elevator in just democratizing to a point, people being able to communicate, as you said, Luam, that share the wind. It's no longer solely reliant on having a connection to big media or having an in-life. And that's how so many movements and that's how so many movements over the last couple of years, you can be in the UK, you can be in Ghana, you can be in Kenya, and in a moment you can be connected with what's happening in a different context. So just wanted to say that. We are coming to an end, which I can't believe. It's just gone so fast, and the gems that you've both given us, it's been fantastic. But before we close, I'm assuming that most of the people watching are working in philanthropy or interested in philanthropy or social justice. So to both of you, what's your ask? How can philanthropy show up and show out for Black women and gender exposed people? And Luam, I'm going to start with you. Hakima, see, I do listen sometimes, even if it's just for the last question.
Like I mentioned, a lot of my work focuses on climate and the climate space. And the most recent IPCC report was just out. And as we all know, we can see from Pakistan to Cyclone Freddy that has hit Southern Africa to really everywhere in the world. We're in the midst of a massive climate crisis that we're running out of time. And so if there's anything I would say to folks listening, and especially if you're working within climate, food, economy, really anything in philanthropy, it's fund movements and not false solutions. That's really important.
Okay, I'm going to jump in, Vanessa, because mine is quite simple. We use it as a tagline. Our message to philanthropy is simply fund Black feminists like you want them to win.
Ashe, done. Fund Black feminists like you want them to win. Fund Black feminists like you want them to win. This has been such a fantastic conversation, and it always really does just go so fast. Thank you, Hakima. Thank you, Luam, for your generosity, your wisdom, your facts, your book recommendations, your content, your sculpture, everything. It's been brilliant. We will be dropping links into the chat so you can check out all of the info and the references that everyone has been referring to. This was recorded and it will be up on the Decolonizing Wealth Project YouTube page. So if there's something you want to scroll back to, or you want to send this to your friends and your people, it's there, it's out there. So yes, fund Black feminist movements like you want us to win, but also follow all of us on social media. So Decolonizing Wealth Project, Styles and Currents, Black Feminist Fund, and also Africa Women's Development Fund. Sign up to newsletters so you can receive everything fresh off the press and really find out how you can kind of engage and stay on top of our work. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so happy that internet has behaved itself for all of us. The heavens are just about to open where I am, and it can now because we're good. So be well, everyone. Thank you, Hakima. Thank you, Luam. Any final words before we close?
Just thank you, Vanessa. It was so much fun. Really appreciate you.
Yes, thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Take care.